Good morning, LinkedIn. Good morning, Facebook and YouTube. Lucky enough to be streaming into three places today with our Wellbeing Wednesday practical coach to coach takeaways with myself, Kerry Davis-Munro, and my colleague, Will Murtha. Morning, Will. How are you this morning?
Morning. We're still kind of like coming around to what's happened in the last week on many levels, personal levels, big
Yeah.
levels, global levels. And yeah, it's been one hell of a week.
Exactly. And I guess we're seeing that with our clients and we're
Yeah.
seeing that with ourselves. And that's why we always choose a topic that we can see is going to reverberate and really resonate with people. So this morning we are going to be talking about transitions. And as Will says, we're talking about transitions and we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but certainly because of the national, the global context, but also because of Facebook being filled with people going through transitions at the moment. And I'm not a Facebook devotee. In fact, I don't even really look at it. But someone has told me, because I'm going through a transition myself with my daughter leaving home to go to college, that actually, this is repeated and resonated throughout social media. So let's first of all ask ourselves, what is a transition? And I came up with this definition. It's a period of change or a case of moving from one thing to another. And really, Will, life is a series of transitions that we don't have the opportunity to say no to, do we? We start in the womb, we move from fetus to embryo to baby to birth, and then we move through life towards the inevitable, which is, we're all going to die. So life is constant. We know we can't stop time, and if we can't stop time, then we cannot stop transitions. So the context of where we find ourselves today in the wider picture, global and national, is really important, Will. So do you want to kick off with that in terms of where we are? You said it's been what a hell of a week. Where are we, in terms of the context here in the UK?
I think what I've noticed in the last week, because me and you coach a lot of people, we're also connected to a lot of groups, a lot of peers and friends of ours, coaches and therapists. And we're all getting feedback. It's like an immune system, isn't it? We're all getting feedback about where everyone's at, how they're feeling, what they're dealing with, what they're struggling with. And I think what we've noticed, and I don't want to focus on just the last week, this last few years as well,
Absolutely. Yeah.
on a bigger level. We're all struggling with change, with transition, with transformation. Now, I think the feedback that I'm getting from clients and friends of their clients is that overwhelm is a massive one at the minute. Most people that show up at our coaching sessions at the moment are almost overwhelmed. They're being triggered so easily. And I tell you my kind of thesis, my understanding of why this is happening. I think we've gone through so much this last few years of, like, let's call it in the tunnel. We've been in the tunnel dealing with a pandemic, holding our lives together, literally sometimes clawing onto our lives so they don't fall apart, in the most scariest thing we've ever faced. Almost apocalyptic at the beginning, wasn't it? We just didn't know where it was going. Now, all that fear, all that anxiety, all that stress didn't just disappear. We put it in our bodies. Now, the problem is, and what I've noticed with clients the last kind of 6 months, as we came out of the tunnel, looked at green grass, looked at blue sky, kind of run out the tunnel, thank heavens, all that's behind us. On a practical level, we thought we'd dealt with everything. But what we're coming to realize now is emotionally, mentally, psychologically, we barely even scratched the surface of dealing with what we needed to do. We call it trauma. In extreme circumstances, we call it post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, PTSD is something that the whole world has just gone through. And I think what is happening now, like, there's been a lot of talk on the in the last week about Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all social media sites, and all people being triggered. I am a royalist, I'm not a royalist, you should support them, you shouldn't support them. I think this polarity that's going on, where we're being so easily triggered either way, and I'm not going to go into the rights and wrongs here, but I think the problem is that so much of our emotion from the last few years is coming out like a volcano at this moment. And it can even frighten us. Sometimes this emotion comes up from nowhere. We call it triggering, we call it projection in psychology. So projection is you've got an event going on over there that you haven't really dealt with emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and you bring it into the now, and it's totally out of scale, it's totally over the top. Road rage is a great example, Carrie, isn't it? You know, road rage. So much of road rage that happens is not because someone cut you up at the roundabout. It's the 20 things that have gone on in the last several weeks that you never dealt with and you just push down into your body. So I think, put in the context, just to wind it up, I think, you know, we're all going through change, transformation, shifts, and the rest of it. But what we've got to realize, change and transition is hard enough anyway. On the back of what we've gone through the last 2 or 3 years, it's even more difficult. And I think the problem is that we resist as human beings. We resist transition. We resist change because we are habitual beings. We don't like it. And the best way we've got to look at it is like the butterfly. There's a reason the butterfly is as an emblem for transformation, in that the butterfly or the caterpillar at the beginning begins to sort of, you know, die, and it looks like it's dying and that's it, it's the end of, but actually that ending is really a new beginning. You know, it transforms into something better and brighter. And I think that's what, as much as the pain and suffering that we're all going through at the moment, that's what we've got to keep holding that image of.
Yeah, I love that image, and it reminds me of, you know, again, the frog going through different stages. You don't just get from here to here. You have to go through these transitions.
Yeah.
So for me, that divides into two things. We've got sort of the outer context, and I always say, if we're in control of something and in our circles of control, I think the last 2 years have been huge. I advise people to come right into the center of your circle of control. You know, we have got transition all around us in the UK. We're still reeling from Brexit. We're coming out, as you say, of the last 2 years of COVID. COVID's still here, but new ways of working, new ways of being. We've got a new prime minister in the UK. We've got a new king. We have a new season. I noticed last night it was dark at nearly 8 o'clock.
I know.
It had rained. So my goodness me, we are right bang smack in the middle of transitions. For me, fundamentally important because we can't control them. And then we come into our circle control, and then we have that balance with things that are personal. And again, there's things in there that we can control and we can't. So, for example, we might have the passing of a loved one. We might have an illness, you know, for us, or again, a loved one that we're moving through or they're moving through and we're supporting them. We might have a new job, a promotion, very different kind of transition. We might be going through menopause and trying to understand and make sense of why the chemicals in our body don't work the same, and why mentally that makes us feel different, and physically our skin's changing and our gut isn't working the same. We might have the split of a relationship. We might have a child leaving home. You know, that's me this week. We might have our parents who, you know, suddenly we are becoming the carer and moving them or taking care of them. So we have such a massive range of personal transitions and changes, and for me there are some fundamental differences, and I'm going to give mine, Will, and then I'd love you to see how, you know, or to put how you would explain this, because I know that you do it in a lovely way as well. So I always say to people when I'm coaching them, let's understand first of all, is this a transition that was a shock to you, or was it planned? So we're talking polarities again. Where are you on that seesaw? And I often get them to draw a seesaw, you know, in terms of the shock. Or I knew it was coming. Was it gradual or was it immediate? Yeah, because the speed at which we process things and the speed at which we come at things is really important. And is it a finite transition or is it an ongoing transition? Yeah. Might we be able to break that down? And then, as I've said before, I think fundamental for me is, do we feel in control of this transition or is it out of our control? Yeah. And they're really, really important questions. And then coming out of that, I'd say, having noticed that on your seesaws, on the polarity scale, did we therefore have time to plan this transition and the adjustment? Did it land upon us? how do we perceive the outcome? Because Will, you and I know this. It's attitude and perception and mindset is everything. How do we perceive the outcome? Is it positive? Is it negative? Because this helps us understand why we feel like we do and process the emotions. And number 4 for me would be, what emotions with those situations are we experiencing? And ask yourself why. And then I'm going to come to, and I'm going to hand over to you. There's a fundamental difference between these things happening to us and us processing that inside. So there's outer change and inner change, Will, isn't there?
I think the problem with change is that we all like it. We all believe in it. We all like to evolve. We'd like to become better, grow our high performance. We like change, but we try and kid ourselves it's under our conditions. No, change doesn't work like that. It's a bit like the wind, a bit like the weather. It will sing to its own beat and rhythm and not ours. And I think the thing that I've noticed, I picked all this up from William Bridges. William Bridges was an American guy, a top psychologist in the 80s. He wrote a book called Transitions. It's sold by the bucket load, millions and millions of copies. It's still popular today. And Transitions for me kind of helped me to look at the difference. And I think this is where I'm always telling clients in the first early sessions of our program, is that I get them to define there are 2 kinds of shift going on. One is the external, so the visual, and that's the outer change. Now, the outer change is what I term change, and it's basically moving the chess pieces. So it could be a new boss. It could be a new partner, like you with your daughter. It could be, leaving home. It could be moving to a new job. It could be, a health issue. So it's all external, visual, transactional stuff. That's the proper outer change. Now, the inner change, which is I call transition or transformation, is a completely different thing. It's out of the eye line. It's below the waterline. It's basically in the world of feelings and emotions and thinking and beliefs and perceptions and mindset shifts. Now, where I notice this as a problem, when I'm coaching people that are going through change, or part of a company that I'm working within, and they are going through massive overhaul and change, or they've been taken over, or whatever shifts are going on, they seem to concentrate a lot on the external stuff. They get the new offices ready, and they put the desks in, and they'll have a new culture program, and they're putting all the different stuff together. But if you don't concentrate on the inner, the relationships, how people feel about change, their fears, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, if you don't deal with that, I tend to see that the change doesn't stick. Yeah. It's almost like the foundation stone you haven't got. And it's a bit like this, when the metaphor, as the metaphor in the Bible says, when the rains come, it's built on sand, and there's no stability, there's no pillars to kind of anchor that change on. So the way I see change is very much like I always describe it to clients in, we're moving away from the old island life, which is your, what's not working for you anymore, or what you've been forced to leave that island, forced change, which is what we've, with the Queen, and it's forced change that people are uncomfortable with. Now, what people naively sometimes do, they go from old island straight to new island, which is new beginning. So that's your hopes, dreams, intentions, aims, objectives, visions for the future. Now, the problem with going from old life island to new island life is that you've missed out the most important part. Now, the most important part is what I would call where we're lost. It's the neutral zone. It's the bit where you're trying to redefine yourself. You're kind of confused. You're dealing with depression. You're not sure of what's happening with the world anymore. You've got self-doubt about yourself. You've got self-doubt about the world. It's that kind of grieving, that kind of you're wandering, like Jesus said. You're wandering in the desert, lost. And you're contemplating your next steps. You're contemplating what is the meaning of life. Now, that neutral zone, as William Bridges called it, is the most important stage, because you cannot have old island, new island, old life, new life, without the bridge of going through the pain and suffering and confusion of the neutral zone. And I think that's the best way that I try to explain transition. Transition is not missing out that all important middle stage, which is where a lot of people are at the moment, the last few days and weeks and months. We've got to realize we're transitioning from one old life in society to another, and we're not really appreciating that confusion of the neutral zone in the middle.
Yeah, and processing that, and I've got a number of clients going through some very, very difficult changes that they know they need to make, but goodness me, there's so much fear coming up. And while I'm as practical as the next coach, and we definitely look at what we can do and move through it, because it's all about moving forward. One of the biggest things for many clients is to actually just process and allow the emotions to move through. And you and I talk about this, Will, and the fact that, we can't really coach without being aware of those emotions. It's a bit like the iceberg, as you say. We can do all the bit at the top that we see and that, you're moving and you're coming past, but actually below, coming out here, is all these things that we can trip over or crash onto if we're not
blind spots. Blind spots.
Exactly. So within that, I see that emotions. You and I both coach around emotions a huge amount, and I do even more now. I use heart math. I really get people to understand what's going on for them, because this is affecting our. I say it again, we're a mass of chemicals. And when we're going through transitions, we want our chemicals to be working in the right way. So understanding them, moving them through us, and using things like heart math or our meditation or other things is really important. So I sort of group those emotions together, and I, around real life examples of what I'm sort of coaching at the moment. And, this is what I see. At one end of the spectrum, we've got probably moving from, almost shock transition, loss, regret, sadness, guilt, depression, lonely, vulnerable. Yeah, my goodness me, massive amount of difficult emotions to navigate. Then we might be having a set of emotions based on fear. And don't get, when I look at lots of transitions, when we fundamentally come down to, one emotion behind the change, it often comes down to fear, Will, doesn't it? So fearful, scared, anxious, weak, insecure, adrift, as you've said, overwhelmed, challenged. Yeah. And then we've got at the other end of the scale, and we don't often think about this, but obviously some transitions are absolutely uplifting and very different. So
and
we
seamless,
might have,
seamless.
yes,
yeah.
Excited, energized, joyful, fulfilled, eager. And let's not forget, when you say that seamless, this does depend on the individual. Yeah,
and the event. Yeah,
we are a laboratory of one. How one person reacts to a set of worldwide events is very different from another. And on Saturday, when I took my daughter to college and I couldn't stop crying, there's a number of people that will be looking at me like, what is going on? And yeah, that's me. I cry at every film.
And they're cheering. They're cheering their children going.
Yeah, exactly. But that's me, and I know that's me. And I am a very different situation than anybody else. And I thought that then it would be really interesting to look at some of the emotions that I have gone through, because you can imagine I've done some work on myself this week. So I guess I've got pride. I feel really proud. I'm grateful that she's got there, but also grateful for my relationship. I'm full of respect about the way that she's gone there. Yeah, she has some anxiety, to say the least. I'm optimistic. I'm going to move through. That's the way I need to be through this. But I am also aware that I am navigating some loss. I'm navigating, again, a sort of emptiness, a void. I'm navigating some loneliness in a way, and therefore I'm navigating grief. So I think understanding and processing these emotions is really, really important. And for me, this is where we come to the tools of what do we do here. And for me, it's always been one thing all my life, Will, from the age of 7, navigating a shock transition to other transitions. For me, there's a number one thing, and that's always exercise. I have to move my body. I have to change the chemicals. I have to really up the ante on the exercise. And then you won't be surprised that the second thing for me is to cook and to, you know, reprogram and make sure that I'm programming the mind, the chemicals and everything in the right way. And then, you know, third to that or equal to that would be, as we talk about again and again and again, and I've been doing with my emotions, understanding where they sit and journaling, using friends, using people like you, chatting things through and understanding where we sit. That would be my first sort of top set of tools. Because we do need to move it through, Will, don't we? We don't have the opportunity to stand still with it.
The biggest example we were talking about just before we jumped on live, the biggest example for me was I had a client, you know, just before I go on to a couple of options about how I help people self-coach. There was a client and he was big in the construction industry, and he was you know, like certain industries, they have a kind of visionary, they have a, you know, a thought leader, call it. And this kind of leader, 40 odd years in the construction industry, he was in house building. He was seen as one of the go-to kind of anchors. Anyway, he meticulously planned for his retirement and the finances, and joined a golf club where he lived in Devon, and everything. He got all the chess pieces in the right place. But here's where he had a problem, which is why we jumped on and started coaching. He'd not done any of the inner work. You know, he'd done all the change bit and prep, but he's not doing any of the prep for the transition, which is the emotions. And we know that if you don't get your emotions, your thoughts and everything into order, you know, you're going to be in real problems. So that was a big example for me. And I remember talking to him about, you know, the rites of passage, you know, older indigenous tribes, ancient societies, our forefathers, you know, they all had rituals for transition, like emotionally, mentally, psychologically, to become, you know, from you know, boy to man, and from sort of, you know, girl to woman. And they were called rites of passage. But we don't have that anymore. We think that all the change is to do with the outer and not the inner. So, you know, keep coming back to emotions. This is why the journal, me and you, live and breathe by the journal. Now, I don't know if many people know this. We've all heard of emotion wheel, you know, or feeling wheel, as it was called originally. But if you Google emotion wheel, feeling wheel, you'll see a big wheel with lots of different colors, with 100 or 200, depending on the wheel you go for. There will be 200 perhaps different emotions that you go through on a wheel, and then there's like a middle wheel and an inner wheel. Really good, because sometimes we need to name it before we claim it, which means we've got to understand which emotion we're going through. Now, it was actually constructed by a woman called Gloria Wilcox, who was a psychologist in Florida in the 80s, I think. And, you know, she devised it for couples who were going through relationship problems, to help them express how they're feeling. Because sometimes we kind of can't articulate an emotion until we name it and claim it. So Gloria came up with this feeling wheel.
There we go.
Oh, you got. Oh, I like it very much. Yeah, very. And as you can see, I can just check. Yeah, there's what is there? 6 or 7 core emotions there. You know. Yep. So what you're going to do? You're going to find out. Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling disgusted? Am I feeling angry? You start with the middle wheel, and then it kind of works out to the middle kind of emotions, and then there's the kind of emotions on the edge. That is actually, that one you've got there is one of my favorite versions, because it's got the most, it's got one, there's a couple that are like smaller than that, but that is the kind of emotion wheel that you want to be going for. And the thing is, what you then do, you work with, you know, what I do with clients, I work with the emotion wheel, and then I work with my journal. So that becomes the absolute jump off point of, how am I feeling about this? You know, what is happening here? Now, the best way to do that in your journal is you take a page. You've heard me talk about this many times, Carrie, but you know, it's worth reiterating. You know, you take one page of your journal, you divide your journal into 3, top, middle, and bottom. And at the top, you literally write in one little paragraph, this is what happened. this is what happens. So we could be talking about an event, we could be talking about a fear, we could talk about, grief, like you've gone through with loss, with your daughter leaving home and everything. So, this is what happened, is that first top bit. The middle sandwich is, this is how it made me feel. And literally work with the emotion wheel on that middle section and locate what feelings. It could be loss. It could be regret that you didn't live a life and make the most of her time there. It could be sadness. It could be 20 different emotions. But if you name them, at least you start to take control of them. And then the bottom third of this page of the journal, you literally look at, okay, how am I going to deal with it? How am I going to overcome this? Because you've got to have a strategy to get out and deal with it. Otherwise, you get stuck in your emotions or your thoughts. What do we call it with thoughts? We call it analysis paralysis. So, these kind of little tricks and flicks are there to help you self-coach yourself to understand where your triggers are. We are all at the moment, and we've seen this last week on social media, we've seen it in ourselves, we're all almost starting at 95% high on our emotion scale. The first little thing comes along, doesn't it? And we're easily triggered. We're triggered because all of that emotion that's been stacked up is quite near the surface. So it only needs one or two more things. It's basically the straw that broke the camel's back. One or two extra things, and we kind of trigger and our emotions go out of control. And so much often is not about, people would know this the last kind of week. They go, I'm not really a royalist, and yet I feel myself really grieving and really sad for the whole collective. Yeah, that's because you're feeling it on a morphic resonance level. Heart math talks about this, doesn't it? With resonance, we pick up the grief of others and we make it our own grief, and that happens a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I love the wheel of emotion, and I use it a lot. And sometimes I will, I use it the other way of you that you do. I combine it with a most fantastic heart math tool, which gets people to plot where they are in terms of quadrants. And one quadrant represents the sympathetic body, where we go, the cortisol, and actually this is quite damaging for us. And then there's high end negative emotions, low end. And then positive emotions, again, high end, high energy, positive emotions, and low end feelings of compassion and peace and calm. And it's really important for us to know this. And I use that in conjunction. So I might say to people, okay, well, you plotted here, and that's the emotion you came up with. Let's track it back. And they might be quite surprised to say, actually, tracking it back, yeah, that comes back to fear. I hadn't recognized that. And as we always say, you have to call it out, you have to understand it, to name it, to claim it, to move through it, and to be able to process it. So understanding that and plotting that, some weeks I'll say that's all we're going to do this week. We're just going to plot your emotions. When you've been triggered, put a cross, come down, understand one line, what happened to me there? Yeah. And again, what did I do about it? And then let's plot that. And understanding and processing is so important. And some of the other things that I will say to people, as well as that, an understanding on that sort of quite forensic level, we've then got to shift that energy, plan to move forward, because when we're going through difficult situations, definitely when you're going through hell, you just got to keep going. So it's about understanding where your energy sits, I believe, and also moving that energy through them. So as I said, for me, that's exercising, walking, being out in nature, maybe booking a holiday. Sometimes you have to move out of the physical space that you're in to change that energy. Dancing is incredible for shifting your energy, as is music. And again, building your rewards. I always say to clients going through difficult transitions, right, how are you going to reward yourself? That might be, I'm going to go for a massage. I'm going to go and play golf. I'm going to go for a lake swim. I'm going to get my nails done. Understand what those rewards are. And as I've said before, make sure they are positive rewards for the body, things that really benefit you. You're sitting with a bottle of wine in the evening when you're going through transition is not going to benefit you or help you process. Spend time with pets. Cook. Change the chemical makeup. Every meal we have is programming. It's programming. It has the ability to make you feel better, keep you where you are, or at worst make you feel worse. So understand where you're at, and seek professional support, I guess, if you really do need support. As we said, as coaches, we work with people on change all the time. Or maybe you might need a more therapeutic approach, but taking action puts us back in control. And I just want to, to have a couple of quotes to finish up, and I'm sure you'll finish up in a similar way. But Roosevelt said, there are many ways of going forward, but there's only one way of standing still. And Armin Witt says, never stand still, because if you do, you'll get lost. Someone else is always moving. And then how to find the stillness in these times. Time stands still in the moments that look suspiciously like ordinary life. And we do have to get on with ordinary life, don't we? Sometimes we have to move from paralysis, that first island, to acceptance, to action.
Part of life, and unfortunately we're not taught of any of this at school, college or university, or rarely unless we're on a specialized course, is that we're not taught how to deal with overthinking, overwhelm, emotional triggers. We're not taught any of that emotional energy management stuff. And, I think back on what this energy build in the last few weeks has done, if anyone wants to go to my Instagram account at will.murtha, I've posted an article on overwhelm, because it's a big thing that we're seeing showing up in every client at the moment. And I've also posted, if you go to the story element, one of the stories, there's about 6 or 7 short little pieces on emotional triggers. Because if you don't understand what is happening to you emotionally with triggers, you can't deal with it, because you're like, well, why am I so really in that space and place at the moment? Well, it's not really about what's happening in the here and now. Obviously, with the last week with the Queen, that's an element of it. But that is, Hollywood understands this all the way. I remember reading a book by a top screenwriter, and he said Hollywood understands filmmaking in the point that you put universal themes, purposely triggers there, so that you bring people's emotion to the surface. They know how to do it. They've trained in this stuff. And I see it with clients all the time. So I teach people about what is really going on, because, like road rage, what's really going on in your peripheral, in the here and now, is not the whole story. What you're doing is the volcano is blowing, but it's actually been building for weeks, months, years, and especially in this case, what we've gone through. So much of what we're feeling at the minute is nothing to do with just what's happening this last week.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious of the time, Will. We've gone much longer than we thought we would. If anybody out there is struggling with change, if this has resonated, then do reach out. We'd love to know your thoughts, your comments, your feelings on this, what emotions you're dealing with at the moment, what situations you might be struggling with, what transitions you're going through. And as we've said, we're both here on LinkedIn. We're also very responsive on Instagram. So do let us know what your thoughts and feelings are. Has that been useful for you? How do you go through transition? We'd love to know. We'd love to hear from you. And Will and I will be back next week with another practical Coach to Coach on Wellbeing Wednesday. Will, thank you so much.
Great. Have a good week. Take care, Karen.